The movie opens in the small, rural town of Clanton, Mississippi. Two white men, Billy Ray and Pete, are driving down a dusty road in their pickup truck. They are drinking beer and are clearly being racist as they throw beer bottles at two guys playing basketball. Their eyes light up with malicious intent as they spot Tonya, a 10-year-old black girl, walking alone after running an errand for her family. Billy Ray and Pete throw a bottle on her head, dragging her into their truck despite her desperate cries. They drive to a secluded spot in the woods. There, they brutally rape and beat her, then attempt to hide their crime by tying her up and leaving her for dead. Remarkably, Tonya survives and stumbles home, where she is found by her family. When her father carries her to the ambulance, it sets off a wave of shock and horror through the community. The sheriff finds the little girl's shoes in the truck of Bill Ray and Pete, so they are arrested. Tonya's father, Carl Lee Haley, is overwhelmed with grief and rage. He visits Jake, a local attorney and friend, seeking advice on how to ensure justice is served. Jake advises Carl Lee to trust the legal system. At home, Jake tells his wife that he is worried that the system might fail them and that Carl Lee might do something stupid. The next day, Billy Ray and Pete are brought to the courthouse for their preliminary hearing. We see that Carl Lee, who has decided to take justice into his own hands, waits hidden inside the courthouse. As the men are led out of the building in handcuffs, Carl Lee emerges and opens fire with an M16 rifle, killing both of them instantly. In the chaos, Deputy Dwayne is accidentally hit in the leg by a stray bullet. Carl Lee tries to escape back home, but once he is there, he is immediately apprehended. Jake, the young but capable attorney, decides to represent Carl Lee despite the enormous personal and professional risks. He goes to seek advice from his older mentor, who helps him out with the case. The Ku Klux Klan re-emerges, vowing revenge against those who support Carl Lee. Jake's wife, Carla, is frightened for their safety, knowing the case will stir racial tensions and make them targets. Jake's resolve remains unshaken, believing deeply in Carl Lee's right to a fair trial. The case quickly attracts national media attention, igniting a firestorm of racial tension in the town. District Attorney Rufus Buckley, an ambitious politician, sees the high-profile case as a career-making opportunity. He aggressively pursues the death penalty for Carl Lee, painting him as a cold-blooded vigilante. Judge Omar News, presiding over the case, strives to maintain order and fairness, but often rules in favor of the prosecution on procedural matters. During the court meeting, Jake and Carl Lee decides to plead not guilty due to insanity, and during this, an ambitious law student, Ellen, helps Jake by giving him notes to use. The KKK have a meeting where they decide to ruin the trial by going after Jake. As the trial begins, the atmosphere in Clanton is charged with hostility. The Klan stages violent protests, targeting Jake and his family. They burn a cross on Jake's lawn and plant a bomb at his home, forcing Carla and their daughter Hannah to flee for their safety. Despite these threats, Jake remains determined to defend Carl Lee. As the trial day approaches, Jake assembles his defense team, including his dedicated secretary, Ethel, and Harry, a brilliant but rough local lawyer. Ellen also offers to join the defense team, offering her services pro bono. Meanwhile, in the streets of the cities, there are many riots and protests from the two groups. In the courtroom, the trial is a dramatic clash of legal strategies and emotional appeals. Buckley presents a strong case, emphasizing Carl Lee's premeditation in the killings. He calls witnesses who testify to the brutal nature of the crime, aiming to portray Carl Lee as a dangerous vigilante. Jake counters by focusing on the horrific assault on Tonya, arguing that Carl Lee's actions were driven by an unbearable emotional torment. He attempts to humanize Carl Lee, presenting him as a loving father pushed to the brink by the brutalization of his daughter. The defense faces numerous challenges, including biased jurors and procedural setbacks. Deputy Looney, despite being injured by Carl Lee's gunfire, expresses sympathy for Carl Lee, acknowledging the emotional anguish he must have felt. This testimony helps to cast Carl Lee in a more sympathetic light. When Jake and his team leave the courtroom, a sniper from the Klan tries to shoot Jake, but hits a guard instead. Outside the courtroom, Ellen becomes a target for the Klan. She is kidnapped and nearly killed in a harrowing encounter, but she manages to escape. During this time, Dr. Willard Tyrell Bass testifies to the severe physical and psychological trauma Tonya suffered, providing a harrowing account of her injuries. When Jake finds out what happened to Ellen, it further strengthens Jake's resolve to see the trial through, highlighting the deep-seated hatred and racism they are up against. The tension continues to build as the trial progresses. In a critical scene, Jake visits Carl Lee in jail, and they have an intense conversation about race and justice. Carl Lee doubts that a white man like Jake can truly understand his plight, but Jake reassures him of his commitment to the case. This conversation deepens the bond between them and reinforces Jake's determination to fight for Carl Lee. As the trial nears its end, Jake makes a risky decision to put Carl Lee on the stand. Carl Lee testifies about his state of mind, revealing his profound grief and desperation. His heartfelt testimony resonates with the courtroom, adding a deeply personal dimension to the case. Jake's closing argument is the climax of the trial. He asks the jurors to close their eyes and imagine the horrific details of Tonya's assault, describing it in graphic and gut-wrenching detail. The courtroom is silent as Jake paints a vivid picture of the violence and suffering Tonya endured. Then he delivers the line that becomes the turning point of the trial. "Now imagine she's white." This statement forces the jurors to confront their own prejudices and the racial dynamics at play in the case. The jury deliberates for an agonizingly long time, heightening the tension. The entire town is on edge, awaiting the verdict. Finally, the jury returns with a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupts with mixed reactions, jubilation from Carl Lee's supporters and shock from those who wanted a conviction. Carl Lee is free, but the emotional and social scars of the trial run deep. Carl Lee thanks Jake for his unwavering support and sacrifices, acknowledging the personal cost of the case. Jake, in turn, expresses his respect and admiration for Carl Lee's courage. He invites Carl Lee and his family over for a barbecue, symbolizing a step towards healing and reconciliation, not just for them but for the community as a whole. The film closes on a note of cautious optimism. Jake's victory represents a significant step towards justice and equality in Clanton, but the lingering tensions remind us that the fight against racial injustice is far from over. The movie leaves us with a powerful message about empathy, courage, and the enduring struggle for civil rights. The aftermath of the trial continues to unfold as Jake and his family attempt to return to a semblance of normalcy. The town remains divided, with some residents celebrating the verdict and others harboring resentment and anger. The Klan, though temporarily subdued, still poses a threat, and Jake knows that the battle for justice is ongoing. In the final scenes, we see Jake visiting Carl Lee at his home, where the two men share a meal with their families. This moment of unity and friendship serves as a hopeful symbol of progress and understanding, highlighting the possibility of change and reconciliation in a town marred by racial strife. As the families bond over the meal, they discuss their hopes for the future. Carl Lee expresses his gratitude to Jake for his unwavering support, while Jake acknowledges the strength and resilience of Carl Lee and his family. This gathering signifies a small but significant step towards healing the deep wounds inflicted by the trial and the underlying racial tensions. Thanks for watching another Essential Recap. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment what you'd like to see next.